Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. Today it is the 15th of July, 2022. Happy Friday to you all out there. On today's show, we're discussing the potential for a Pac-12, Big 12 merger. Does it make sense for the Big 12 to do it? And also my 5 biggest takeaways from Big 12 Media Days, which just wrapped up yesterday in Dallas, Texas. All that and more coming up on today's show.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Locked On Big 12 podcast here. Glad that you all are joining us on this Friday. Thank you all for making Locked On Big 12 your first listen/watch every single day. You can find us on Twitter at LO Big 12. You guys can find me at Josh Neighbors _ personally. You guys find the show wherever you get podcasts here on YouTube as well. All right, so I've seen this idea kicked around from John Wilner over at Pac-12 Hotline. And also I saw Andy Staples get an article yesterday about, dear Andy, it's his mailbag. Why is the perception that the Big 12 is a step down from the Pac-12? And he says that vibe confused him as well, and discussed the idea of a merger that, where these two conferences would come together. And that's something that we have talked about. So we've mentioned it, but I really don't think I've done a deep dive on what a merger would look like. So I thought that we could do that today. Now, there are several different iterations that a merger could take, right? I mean, if it was a straight up merger right now, the Big 12 has 10 teams, Big 12 would have 12 teams. There you go. 12 teams, as they're losing OU and Texas, bringing in the new 4 schools, as we know, Houston, UCF, BYU, and Cincinnati. And then the Pac-12 has now 10 teams, and you can just go really a lot of it's state by state. They've got the 2 Washington teams, the 2 Oregon teams, the 2 Bay Area teams, the 2 teams from Arizona, and they've got Utah and Colorado. That makes up your 10 once you lose the USC and UCLA piece. So altogether, if you were to bring these 2 conferences, just put them in one big pot and put them together, that would give you 22 teams to start off with. So you'd have 22 teams. And I think if you were to say, okay, when I have those 22 teams, what are my best 4 brands? I would put Oregon up there. I'd put Washington up there. I'd put, branding is one thing, but I guess performing football schools, like if you kind of want to do, the 4 best products, I guess you have to sell. Those 2 have to be in there because they're watched, they're really well known. I would say Baylor and Oklahoma State right now are the 2 kind of heavy hitters that the Big 12 put forward. Baylor has the recent success in winning the Big 12 and picked to do it again. And also, in the state of Texas. Then also you have got Oklahoma State, who has sustained success as well, a top program. So kind of those 4 schools almost being the flagships, if you will, in terms of football and whatnot. And that's kind of the basis of your league. 22 teams. It would span all the way from California and more pertinently, Washington and Oregon, all the way down to Florida. I mean, you have the entire country covered and everywhere in between, from West Virginia, Cincinnati, Iowa, Kansas, Oklahoma, Utah, Texas, obviously, Arizona, Washington, Oregon, California, Colorado, all of those states you have covered. So you have a lot of markets covered right there. Advantageous for sure. I think so. But then questions come in like this. Okay, number 1, who takes control of the conference? Who runs this conference? Is the Big 12 taking point on this new league, or is the Pac-12 taking point on this new league? Or are you going to have 2 conference commissioners? I doubt that would, co-CEOs, if you will. I don't know. I don't think that would happen. But yeah, I mean, you have to realize, it's not like Brett Yormark is unfamiliar with that. And also, I'm sure George Kliavkoff, too, being in the business world, is not unfamiliar with this as well. I know that Brett Yormark spoke about the CEOs and the people he worked with at Rock Nation. Also, his brother was a co-CEO as well. They ran things together. So he's had experience kind of in that spot. That would be the number one question is, how would this conference be run? Would it be kind of the Big 12 taking over, Pac-12 taking over? Would be a mix of two? And how does that corporate mix work? Now, I'm not somebody who's super familiar with corporate America and how things like that would work. So a merger of conferences like that, I mean, I've got no clue. There'd be so much to hammer out. It can't just be an alliance, a gentleman's agreement, a loose association. We can't be using those words. It's got to be a full-on, we are together, one league now. We saw what alliances get you, not very far, right? Number two, the question would be, are you going to add more teams? All right. Are you going to add teams like San Diego State? I know a lot of San Diego State fans out there have been clamoring for me to add them in some of our conversations, some of our talks. So would a San Diego State get their way into this thing? Would a Boise State, would a UNLV, would a Fresno State, would those schools, would the door be open for them to join the league? I think also when I think about all of this stuff, I'd heard Brett Yormark at Big 12 Media Days, a lot of us did, where he talked about adding value to the conference, right? He wants to add value. He does not want to be in a situation where you're adding excess onto the league. And the league is not in a spot right now where they have to, right? So do you want to tack on a San Diego State? Does that bring value to your conference? Does a TV company want to pay more money because you have San Diego State in there? I'd say the best shot for having that would be a Boise State, which is an actual brand and people know and is it's a really good football program, right? That is one that I would say definitely, you can make the case for adding value. I would say UNLV has a better shot than San Diego State because of where UNLV is situated. I know people in the Pac-12 love the events that they have in Vegas. They love the way they're run. They love the way the city's set up for it. They think it's a really good time. And I've been, talking on this podcast before that I actually think adding UNLV might not be an awful idea for the Big 12 if you want to get into Vegas. So we're already in Utah. Why not go to Nevada and, get yourself into that Las Vegas market, give yourself a home there. So we'll see. But I think that is something interesting. SMU and Memphis are two others that I think we definitely consider adding on. So would you go from 22 to 24 to kind of, or, 25 is not a nice even number. It's just like a nice, because it's, 1/4 of 100. I think it's nice. But I think in terms of splitting things up to it's easy to split 24 up into 12, which is really nice, or 3 of 8, depending on however you want to do it. So 24 gives you a nice even number. Okay. If you get to 22, will you go and add 2 more? And I think if you were to, being really strategic about who you add would be important. Once again, trying to add value here, because at certain points, we've mentioned this also, at what point are you just cutting the pie into more slices, right? You might add a little bit more change, but if you're adding some more money and you're cutting the pie up still, like, is it going to eventually, is it going to be worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze if you're adding more teams and they don't add really that much value to the league? You're just splitting more money in more directions. And does that make, more sense? Like, you want to add value, you want value propositions, you want to add, some of these valuable entities, I should say, to your conference. And I think if we go to 22 teams, 24 makes sense, picking and choosing the 2. Now, maybe you think, hey, well, if you're going to do this, why not go and add a Boston College? Now, I think that market's not as good as we think it is, but Boston College or a Georgia Tech in Atlanta, right? Maybe a school that would get left out of conference realignment for the ACC if they break up, or, and I know it would be down the road, it'd be tough to target, but, if they can get 8 schools to break the grant of rights, all right, you go and collect somebody who's not in those 8 schools, and I don't think they can get 8 to break it. It's going to be difficult to do, though stranger things have happened, I guess you could say. So on that front, that is something there. Do you add teams, or do you go the other way? I think there's a situation where a merger, it's weird to think of a merger as a way that you cut teams off, right? Like, okay, is there a situation where the Pac-12 and the Big 12 merge and you tell Washington State and Oregon State to go kick rocks, right? Is that something that could happen to take you, that would take you then down to 20 teams? That becomes more and look, at that point, I don't think George Kliavkoff in good faith could make that argument now, or make that pitch to schools, because his job is to serve the presidents. Right now, what you could argue is that the other presidents, the other 8 presidents from non-Washington State and non-Oregon, might come forward and say, we need this. We have to go. We have to merge. We can't look out for those schools. We have to. That's a difficult spot to be in. So could somebody get left behind? But when you're talking about leaving schools behind, you stop becoming it stops becoming a merger and becomes more of a takeover, right? That's why I've been saying so much on this show that the Pac-12 is a house of cards, and it's getting ready to fall. And I've always expressed this too. I love this league. I love the Big 12 league, and it has to change names and become something different. Like, that's fine. What is a league? It's a collection of schools, right? So to me, what matters overall is the health of the schools. The banner behind me is nothing, like Kansas State, Iowa State, TCU, Texas Tech. All those schools make up the Big 12. The Big 12 is just the banner that flies over them. So those institutions, those teams, you're you don't wear Big 12 apparel out there. I'm probably the only person out there, and me and Robbie Triano over at SiriusXM and the folks at SiriusXM Big 12 Radio, which I'm a part of, we probably wear Big 12 stuff, but you guys aren't out there just wearing Big 12 apparel. No, it's about your all schools, the health of the schools, and that's what we care about here. Now, I care about the health of those other schools too. I've mentioned it a lot. I don't like the idea of breaking all these things up, but we might have to go in that direction. So once you get to the idea of, hey, some people might have to get cut off, that's when things really get interesting. And that's why I think that's when legislatures get involved too. They're already involved now, but the idea of, I know Oregon and Washington are trying to fight this in the state legislatures. The idea of their 2 flagship public schools being broken up in leagues is not something they're comfortable with, and nor should they be comfortable with that, to be honest. We all don't want that. That's not something that we love to see happen, but I think this is where we are trending at this point in time. And so a merger straight up, that would give you some leverage. I think with a merger, I think you definitely would be the 3rd biggest league. But the question becomes for the Big 12, is it better to merge, or is it better to poach, right? Because if they're coming to you with a merger, that means they need to do something here. The Pac-12 needs to do something to up their value. Well, if you're Brett Yormark, if you're in a position of leverage, and that's what a lot of this stuff is, it's business, leverage positioning, and they're coming to you and they need a merger. Look, if you're the Big 12, pitching a merger is not a bad idea. But we know for a fact the Big 12 can stand on its own, right? We know for a fact they can. So I don't think the Big 12 is the one out here pitching the merger idea, although I do love the idea of getting Washington and Oregon in the conference. Is it worth it if you get to go along and you get to get Washington, Oregon? Sure it is. So maybe the Big 12 should push that merger narrative, but they don't need to have it at this point in time. I think they know right now that either Washington and Oregon need to join a big league, or, the 2 big leagues, or they need to join the Big 12, because once again, the prospect of a larger Pac-12 that has expanded from where it is now is not a very appealing one, right? Adding San Diego State and Boise to a 10-team Pac-12 does not make that thing more exciting, especially when you consider the fact that it feels like Washington and Oregon are bound for greener pastures eventually. You can take those teams, sure, but your value as a conference, as a league, is going to slip down the pecking order. And you have an opportunity to put your schools in better position by joining the Big 12. So for the Big 12, a merger does make sense if you can get Oregon and Washington. I know I'm not in love. Once again, I'm not in love with the idea of taking on like all the weight, like Washington State and Oregon State. But hey, it could be worth it if you get those 2 schools. The question is, who runs the league at that point, right? Look, I think there's value for both places, but the Pac-12, I would, once again, I think the Big 12 can make a move that would topple the Pac-12. I think they just have to wait, honestly, because for a fact that the Big 12 is going to be a better product those Pac-12 schools, a more valuable product, those Pac-12 schools than the Pac-12 is. And you have to think about it like this. All right. If you were to take the four corner schools, Colorado, Arizona State, and Utah, and add them to the Big 12, right? It's only a 16 league in the Pac-12. If you were to take Oregon and Washington, add them to the Big 12, it's only an 18 league in the Pac-12, and nobody's going to buy that product. So the Big 12 has some moves to make here. I don't know if they have to go merger because they're in the better spot of leverage right now, right? The Pac-12 needs to make a move or moves. And I'm not sure how many high value ones there are. There are moves they can make to keep the conference afloat. There are not moves they can make to make the conference super competitive, I think, in my opinion. Who knows? I could be wrong, but at 10 teams, adding Boise and San Diego State or Boise and ULV doesn't make a conference a whole lot more competitive, and you're going to be propped up by Oregon and Utah are really good schools. That's awesome. And that's fun. I guess west of the Rockies, you can be a part of that. But money-wise, you've lost your biggest market in Los Angeles. It'd be easier for those schools to come get money from Texas, the Texas schools, what I'm saying here in the Big 12. So I know it's a lot of different variations. I know it's pretty confusing, but kind of go back to my thesis of all of this, right? The Big 12 is in the better leverage spot. They are in a better position. I think it's a better league right now, frankly, as well than the Pac-12 is. Top to bottom, I definitely think there's not much of an argument, right? Arizona schools are hurting. Cal and Stanford have been hurting for a while. Washington State's been really kind of weird, just roller coaster to watch. I know people like Oregon State, but still, you look at that schedule, I'm not sure how good they're going to be this year. Colorado's been up and down. Utah, obviously, 2 thumbs up, really good. But we'll see how long Kyle Whittingham is there right now. So I think that the depth of the Big 12 is better. This would be a move, once again, a merger. I'm not sure how much sense it makes off the top. But, if you were able to kind of retain some of your identity against the Big 12 and get Washington and Oregon, it would make sense. And if you transition to the idea of a super league, well, at that point, you've got 22 schools that you could add to kind of help fill things out. But we'll see what would happen at that point. So, yes, a merger would strengthen the position of the Big 12, but does the Big 12 have to do a merger? No, but would it be worth it almost to get Washington to Oregon? I think that's something they would have to consider. Is the juice worth the squeeze there in terms of the numbers? So something that would be considered, but not something I think is a necessity right now. The Big 12 can wait on this a little bit. The Pac-12 has to go now, and I think that puts them at a weaker leverage point. All right. Quick word from our sponsors, and I'll hit my big takeaways from the Big 12 Media Days. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline and BetOnline.net. Go to BetOnline today. When you guys do, you can bet on odds for who will win the Big 12 next year, who will win the Open Championship this weekend. Plenty of odds for things like that, NASCAR, F1, boxing, MMA, all of that's there at BetOnline and betonline.net today. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. All right, so 5 takeaways from the conference. I'll hit these real fast and get us out of here on a Friday. Number 1, Brett Yormark's about the business. We talked about this before, but he's not here because he loves the atmosphere at Allen Fieldhouse on a Saturday in January. He's not here because of the atmosphere at McLean Stadium the day they beat Oklahoma. He admitted he's a casual fan. He will become a big fan. He is here to help out the business of the Big 12, and business he hopes is going to be booming. So that's number 1. Number 2, Mike Gundy is ready for OU and Texas to leave. Very apparent in his comments, and I know a lot of you in the comment sections here have felt the same exact way. The same exact way that Mike Gundy has felt. You're thinking good riddance, and Mike Gundy said, hey, we want the check. Goodbye, get you out of here, right? That's the big thing. I'm with y'all. I'm with the good riddance crowd if we get the right price, although I do want to see a lot of these compelling matchups that we could get next year and beyond. Number 3, Dave Aranda's a real one. Love the way that he talked about Gary Bohannon, man. He said, I am not here without Gary Bohannon. If you walk into my house, there are pictures of my children with Gary Bohannon. It was sad that he had to not cut him loose, but, he lost the job. But he was a lot more honest than a lot of coaches would be. A lot of coaches want to retain their talent, make competitions go on longer than they actually should be. And because of that, a lot of times, they don't seem honest. And Dave Aranda with this quarterback competition was honest. It felt like from day one. So I love that from Dave Aranda, showing that he is a real one. Number 4, JT Daniels sounds like the guy. I know that Neil Brown wanted to make us believe it was a competition, but it's hard not to listen to a lot of the comments that he made and make it sound like JT Daniels is your quarterback. Now, our friends at Big 12 Radio, Gabe Eicher, made the point. He said, yeah, he brought it back to JT Daniels a whole heck of a lot. So I think that is something there. Number 5, the Big 12 is going to be okay, folks. The league is going to be fine. There is a positivity and optimism at media days, and things can always change, but it sounds like there's a lot of positive momentum for this league, even with OU and Texas leaving. There's excitement. People cared. They were not worried about the health of the conference. They're adding what the conference will add. And so I have to say, it feels like the Big 12 is going to be okay. All right. One more word from our sponsors and we'll call it a day. Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. Go to built.com today. That's built.com. Use the promo code LOCK15, LOCKED15, LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. Once again, they've got Built Go, Built Boost, Built Bars, everything that you guys need. So go to built.com today, promo code LOCK15. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you guys subscribe to the video. Make sure you guys leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Appreciate you all, and leave us your questions for next week's mailbag. All right, you can do that in the comment section below, and also you guys can do it in our community tab where we have a weekly questions thing. So thank you guys for listening. Make sure you guys have a great weekend. Till next time, my friends, as always, stay safe.